Today we're going to try to tackle Leviticus chapters 16 and 17, and these two chapters really really are very significant in terms of Jewish life and the Jewish thought process of Israel, the Hebrews, even up to the time of Christ. We're going to be talking about first in chapter 16, the great day of atonement, and then in chapter 17, the importance of the blood. As we left off last time, what we see portrayed in these chapters is really explained rather well by Paul in Hebrews. In fact, Paul explains a lot in Hebrews of what we've been reading about in Leviticus and the various rituals, the sacrifices, the implements, the celebrations, the festivals of the Jews. Paul points out to us in Hebrews that these are all foreshadowings. They mean something in the context of what is to come. And let me just read as a predicate to what we're going to look at in Leviticus, something out of Hebrews chapter 10. We read part of this last time. It starts out in verse 1. It says, "For the law, since it has only a shadow of good things to come and not the very form of things." So Paul's predicate is that what we read in the law, it's a form, it's a shadow, it's not the thing itself. It's pointing us to the truth. He says, "It can never, by the same sacrifices year by year which they offer continually, make perfect those who draw near." So we've been talking about the sacrifices and how God commanded that certain sacrifices be made. And we know that from the time of Moses, roughly 1500 BC, right up to the time of Christ, those sacrifices were being made on a daily basis. Indeed, the sacrifices were made twice a day. There was the morning sacrifice that occurred about 9 o'clock, and then there was the afternoon sacrifice at about 3 o'clock. And so that was a part of Jewish culture. I mean, if you were a Jew, you recognized those sacrifices and you recognized the importance of them, and you knew that God had commanded it. But Paul comes along in Hebrews, he says, "For this law, it's only a shadow of the good things to come. It's not the very form or substance of these things." And he says, "Moreover, it can never, by the same sacrifices year by year, which they offer continually, make perfect those who draw near." So even though God says, make these sacrifices, observe the Day of Atonement, he says it's not going to be perfect. He says otherwise they would not have ceased to be offered, because the worshipers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have had consciousness of their sin. But in those sacrifices there is a reminder of sin year by year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. So again, that would have been something new for the Hebrews, for the Jews, because they always believed that to be the case. And then insofar as what we're going to read today in the great Day of Atonement, if you jump down to chapter 10, verse 19, he says, "Since therefore, brethren, we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus." Now this would have been very meaningful to the Jews who knew what it meant to enter the holy place, and particularly the Holy of Holies, and who did it, and how it was done, when it was done, and how often. He says, "Since therefore, brethren, we have confidence that we can enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he inaugurated for us through the veil, that is, his flesh." So what do we see there? Paul is saying that this veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies represented what? That's right. He said it represented the flesh of Christ. And we see that in Matthew chapter 27, verse 51, what happened at the time that Christ died? The veil, that veil, of course, is not the veil of the tabernacle. It's now that the tabernacle was replaced by the temple, first Solomon's temple and then Zerubbabel's temple, but the layout was basically the same, that you had the Holy of Holies, in which was the Ark of the Covenant, until it was probably taken away by the Babylonians, and then you had the holy place, but then you had this, in the temple you had this huge veil. Same thing as it symbolized the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, except that the veil of the temple we know is huge. According to Josephus, the veil of the temple was about at least 30 feet tall, and it was woven out of fabric that was like 5 inches thick. Can you imagine? Wearing a pair of jeans made out of that kind of fabric? It was 5 inches thick. And Josephus said it was such a strong thing that would have taken like 6 yokes of oxen to tear it apart. But nevertheless, the scripture accounts that at the time that Christ died, the veil was torn in what direction? From bottom to top?
Top to bottom.
Torn from top to bottom. Symbolizing what? That through the death of Christ, through the breaking of his flesh, the Holy of Holies is opened up to all of us. Whereas before that, it had been sealed off. And as we're going to read today, the Holy of Holies was only entered by one person, the chief priest, and then only once per year. But it's opened up. And it's interesting, sort of as a side note, there's a question that's been hypothesized. Well, what was it about the life and the death, the resurrection of Christ that actually brought about our atonement? Is his birth time the most important time, or his death, or his resurrection, or his ascension into heaven? Well, what we see here is that the time that the Holy of Holies was opened was when? Not the time of his birth. It was the time of his death, before his resurrection, before his ascension into heaven. So we see the importance of his death, the shedding of his blood, and we're going to see how the blood is emphasized, particularly in Leviticus chapter 17. But again, we always need to be reminded, I need to remind myself, every time I study something in the Old Testament, that Christ is revealed there, that what we have in the Old Testament is a foreshadowing, it is a type of Christ. It is intended to tell us something about God's perfect plan of salvation. And so there's a lot in chapter 16 that we're going to see. Now, chapter 16 deals with the law of atonement, and particularly the annual atonement, or what is sometimes referred to as the Great Day of Atonement. And we're going to see that sacrifices and certain rituals were followed on this specific Day of Atonement. And one of the things we might ask is, well, how do the sacrifices that were made on the Day of Atonement relate to all the sacrifices that were performed on a daily basis, twice daily basis, year-round? Well, that's a good question. It's not specifically answered here, but there's a couple of things that we can infer from what we read in Leviticus chapter 16, and that is that this great Day of Atonement, which is a once-per-year event, acted sort of as a, if you will, a ratification of all the prior sacrifices. That these twice daily sacrifices that took place, they were all meaningful, of course, because they were done in obedience to God's command, but all led up to this great Day of Atonement, where the atonement actually occurred. This was the date that according to God's law, the sins were atoned for. And then there's a specific act that takes place that's unique to the Great Day of Atonement that doesn't take place at any other day of the year. And as you read about it, it's the day when, what? The scapegoat, all the sins are laid on the head of the scapegoat, and the scapegoat is then led off into the wilderness, and he's gone. And you say, well, why did that take place? Well, we're going to read about it, but I think the significance of that was that the scapegoat was intended to provide to the children of Israel a visual sign and a visual confirmation, if you will, that all of their sins were being laid on this goat and they were being taken away. So it was a day that they could look at this and say, oh yeah, now I see what's going on with my sins. All of the sins that I've committed have been laid on this animal, and this animal is led away to the wilderness, to a place that we can't see anymore. So then that was the whole idea, was to see that their sins were going to be taken away from them. They would be relieved of their sins. I think it's also interesting as we look at the various feasts, and we've talked about them before, and we're going to talk about them again, but it's significant that in this 7th month, as you read in this chapter and also later on in Leviticus 23, that there were 3 significant feasts that were to be observed in the 7th month, which is roughly equivalent to our month of September. On the very first day of the 7th month was the Feast of Trumpets. What do the Jews call that today? If you have a calendar, it's going to be on every September. You're going to see the Jewish feasts on there. Versus the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah. You've heard that before. On the 10th day of the 7th month, this is on the Jewish calendar, that's the Great Day of Atonement. Okay? And we're going to talk about that. On the 15th of the month, and proceeding for the next 7 days, was the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. And you all remember those. Now, when I was making myself these notes, I thought to myself, now, all right, these feasts, these observances, they were always intended to be a foreshadowing of things to come. And some of the things were fulfilled later in the life of Israel. Some of them were fulfilled during the time of Christ, but maybe some of them have not yet been fulfilled. Think about it, when you think about these various things, can you relate any of these to New Testament events? There's one of them, I'll give you a hint, there's one of them that specifically, I believe, relates to a New Testament event and when it occurred. Any idea? I think if you look at this Day of Atonement, it occurs it occurs exactly on the 10th day of the 7th month, which would be roughly equivalent, plus or minus a few days, to the 10th of September in the modern calendar. Now, I don't know if you all recall when we watched that video about the star and about this guy who took this computer program that could, go back and adjust what the stars look like and equate them to the modern day calendar. What he concluded was that on the date of Mary's conception of Christ, that most likely occurred on September the 11th of 3 BC. Which very easily could have been the exact day of the observance of the Great Day of Atonement. Now that would be interesting. We think of the atonement as, if I had to equate, what does the Day of Atonement mean in terms of New Testament theology? Well, we think about the time that Jesus made his sacrifice to atone for our sins, and that's what a lot of these sacrifices were about. Well, that's true, but that is observed as Passover. Passover is the time that Jesus was sacrificed in that time. Yes, sir?
I hate to say this here, but I may be the only one in here, but what is the Day of Atonement?
The Day of Atonement, that's what we're going to read about. It's this in chapter 16. We're going to read the whole details of it. So when we finish the class today, you're going to know what the Great Day of Atonement was.
Am I the only one that don't know?
And we're going to read about it. We're going to read about it some more times in the Old Testament because it is one of their most important. In fact, I'd venture to say that the Great Day of Atonement was probably equivalent of the Jews' Christmas time. That's what they look forward to the most. They look forward to the day that they could see that goat wandering off into the wilderness and know that their sins were lifted from them.
Are they having Christmas in September?
Say again?
Is that what you're saying?
Well, it was in essence Christmas for them because that was the day that they were pronounced all their sins were forgiven. That was a pretty great day for them. Now, you talk about Christmas, and we go back to what we talked about before. When was Jesus born? We celebrate Jesus' birth on December 25th, but he most certainly was not born there. As best they can tell, he was probably born on June 17th of 2 BC. He said, I hate to hear that.
But they wouldn't have a Christmas because they're still waiting for the Messiah.
That's right. Of course they wouldn't have Christmas back then. But this is the closest they would come. Huh?
Even now, they're still waiting for the Messiah.
That's right. That's right. So the Great Day of Atonement, that Yom Kippur is what they call that, the Day of Atonement. That is one of their greatest holidays because, again, it's the day that they were forgiven. I also think about, we know the Feast of Tabernacles, we talked about that before. That was the day, in that time frame, it actually lasted a week, but the Jews were instructed that they would go out and they would cut branches and they make themselves little huts, little booths, and they'd have to live in those booths for 7 days. And what was the purpose of that? Why did God instruct them to do that?
To remind them of their time in the wilderness?
That's right. That's right. Of their wandering. I think there's even more basic and more profound meaning to that. It was to remind them that the place that they called home, that had a stone foundation and stone walls, that's really not their home. Really, the earth is not their home. We are all sojourning here. We're all basically, we should be living in booths and tabernacles and in tents. And we do live for a time in these earthly tents, but this is not our home. This booth is not my home. The concrete foundation on my street is not really my home. Heaven isn't my home, and that's where I'm going. What about the Feast of Trumpets? That's a very important feast to the Jews. It was a day when they literally sounded the trumpets. What does that relate to, do you believe?
Coming of the King?
Coming of the King, exactly right. But what New Testament event does that foreshadow?
Well, there's a couple. One could be the announcement of Christ's birth. There were trumpets.
Right. Could be.
And then the triumphal entry was another one.
Could be. Could be. I also tend to think it's the date when the trumpet sounds, when Christ comes back, the day of the rapture, when he comes, the trump shall sound, right? And we'll see, and we'll meet the Lord in the air. And so every time we get close to the 1st of September, you might want to think about that and listen carefully for the trumpet.
Well, I mean, that was before Christ was born, so what was this, wasn't there something in their lifetime that they're remembering, that they celebrated?
Who, the Jews?
Yes.
In terms of life of Christ?
The days of the trumpet.
The trumpets, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What trumpets had blown at this time, you know what I'm saying? They probably haven't heard about, the trumpet's gonna blow when Christ comes back.
No, they did not at his birth, you're
I
right.
mean, that's how we can look at it for New Testament, and that might be when it's fulfilled.
Right.
But what event were they celebrating or remembering?
I think, if you look at that, we jump ahead.
They marched around and
Jericho?
God told them to blow the trumpets and the walls fell down.
Jericho is open.
It's before that because they haven't gotten to the
Jericho.
to the promised land yet. They're still wandering around in the wilderness. So we're gonna read about that in more detail in chapter 23. But you see in chapter 23, verse 24, it says, "Speak to the sons of Israel, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder by blowing of the trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work, but you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord." So this is a day that God told them, blow the trumpets and rest and remember. That's basically what it was, and that became their.
And fire was involved.
That's right, their feast of
So
trumpets.
could it be second coming?
Could be. So it could be that this is a foreshadowing of an event, a final event that has not yet occurred. That's the point that I'm trying to make. But you're right, Lon. Just for 1,500 years, really up to this point in time, the Jews are still celebrating the Feast of the Trumpets, and I don't know that they understand what that was really intended to mean.
Well, they had a guy, I can't remember what he was, Peter, went up on the Capitol and to blow the horn.
Yeah.
And he was, I can't remember, from some other country or something, had been become a Christian, and he wanted to go out, and he was going all over the world to blow the trumpet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some people understand what it's about and some don't. But anyway, all right, let's read chapter 16 so that by the end of this class, Tommy and everybody else is going to know what the Great Day of Atonement is, because this is where it is, right here. Okay.
We'll get to it, let Troy explain.
All right. That's what we're going to do. When we finally wind around at him, we're going to let him summarize. Jackie, can you start reading?
The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron who died when they approached the Lord.
All right, pause right here. This is kind of picking up where we left off. We had, I think we left off with that in about chapter 10. You remember where it was that, chapter 10, Nadab and Abihu were stricken dead because they offered strange fire before the Lord. And you say, well, that's really not fair. But we learned that the coals, the embers, that were to be used to ignite the incense could only come from the altar of sacrifice. And why is that? What was the initial ignition of the altar of sacrifice? Anybody remember?
God.
Yeah, God sent the fire down that originally ignited the altar of sacrifice right here, okay? Now inside, let's see if I can tip this. We know that inside the holy place, there's the altar of incense that is just right up against the veil. And that is to burn the incense, so it needed some fire. And so what the priests were supposed to do, the sons of Aaron, they were supposed to ignite the incense that was on the altar of incense in here. They were supposed to take fire that had been ignited by God in the altar of sacrifice, take that into here, put the incense on it, and that would make the pleasing aroma to the Lord. But it says that Nadab and Abihu, they took a shortcut. They got some fire from somewhere else. They took strange fire and brought it into the house of the Lord. And what happened?
Struck dead.
God struck him dead right then. And there's a tremendous message in that. And that is that the incense, as we're going to see, the incense, the smoke that came up was the intercession of Christ. It was that which would bring the people into a right relationship with God. The message of Nadab and Abihu having been struck dead is they were bringing their incense, or the ignition for the incense, from somewhere other than the altar of sacrifice, which was ignited by God, but which also represents the sacrifice of Christ. So the idea is, don't ever expect that you can be in a right relationship with God unless it emanates from the sacrifice of Christ. And that's really the overarching lesson there. So we have that lesson, and Nadab and Abihu, two of the sons of Aaron, were stricken dead. And of course, Aaron was, it kind of, knocked him back, as any father would be taken aback by such a death of his sons. So we have these intervening verses and chapters that we read, but now we're kind of picking up there at the point after which those two boys had been stricken dead. So the Lord now speaks to Moses after the two boys died to give instructions to Aaron about what's going to happen.
Think Aaron was paying attention this time?
I reckon he was.
He's not going to be careless.
He was extremely focused attention, as Lindsay points out.
It's not to change subject, but it's ironic in the Bible how many times you see a high priest or something like this has trouble in his home. He lets his sons kind of bend it, and he don't bring him in long. I'm trying to think of the one that he fell over and broke his neck. Can't think of his name.
Because later on.
I'm just saying, but
That's right.
it's a lesson right there. We got to watch our own household. Huh?
Absolutely.
Look at David and his sons.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a good point, because here, what these boys did, I don't think it wasn't particularly bad. What they were taking the fire and they were going to ignite the incense. They just what was it they did wrong? They didn't follow God's very letter. And of course, symbolically, we know that it's important that you only focus on the sacrifice of Christ as the ignition for your prayers, if you will. But they did something wrong that a lot of people think not that bad. It's sort of like, when they're carrying the ark up to Jerusalem in David's time. What do? They load it onto an ox cart, it starts to tip over, and a guy touches it. He's not doing anything wrong. He's just trying to steady it. He was stricken dead immediately. Why? Wasn't doing it exactly the way God told him to, which was the priests were to stick the poles through the Ark of the Covenant. The priests were to carry it, not to be on an ox cart, and nobody else was to touch it. So, there's certain lines that God draws and says you don't step over them, otherwise you're going to be stricken dead. And so here's another one we're going to see later on. We know that later on from the Old Testament writings that priests were concerned about what's going on here. And this is what was going on here is this is the one day of the year where the high priest, in this case Aaron, could enter into the Holy of Holies. And this is how he had to do it. And we know later on that the Jews became so fearful of the priests that when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, what did they do?
Tied a rope on his leg.
That's right, they tied a rope around his leg. So if he got it wrong and he was stricken dead, they could pull him back out. But these are the rules that are laid out for the one time during the year that the priest can go into the Holy of Holies, which is where the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat was. By my count, I believe that he goes behind the curtain 3 times in this ceremony. But as we go through, let's count and see if you come to the same conclusion. Okay, Jackie, read on verse 2.
The Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain in front of the atonement cover of the ark, or else he will die."
Pause right there. My translation says, "Tell your brother that he shall not enter at any time into the holy place." Well, that's not really right. It doesn't say that you can't go in there any time. It's just you can't go back there any time you want. So what he's saying is, it's not your choice when you go back there. You go back there one time, you go back there on the great day of atonement, and you do it precisely in the manner that I'm going to tell you. Exactly, you got to follow all of these rules. All right, read on.
Because I appear in the cloud over the atonement cover. This is how Aaron is to enter the sanctuary area, with a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to put on the sacred linen tunic with the linen garments next to his body. He is to tie the linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. These are sacred garments, so he must bathe himself with water before he puts them on.
Pause right there. Now, what he's putting on here, as best I can tell, it's not all of these outer garments here. All right. What he's wearing at this point in time are just the linen undergarments. Okay. And I think that's significant too, as a foreshadowing of Christ, and we'll talk about that later on. Okay, read on. So he's supposed to wash himself and put on just the linen undergarment, but not those the other vestments.
From the Israelite community, he is to take 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for the burnt offering. Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household. Then he is to take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it into the desert as a scapegoat.
All right, pause right there. So what do we see here? On the Great Day of Atonement, Aaron, or whoever the high priest is, to wash, he's to put on the linen garments, then he shall offer a bull. It says he shall take from the congregation 2 male goats, but before that, he's going to take a bull and a ram. Verse 3 says he can take a bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. What do those 2 represent? The sin offering and the burnt offering. Remember, the sin offering that was, even though it's basically we have multiple sacrifices, but the sin offering and the guilt offering were offered together. They were the last ones that are described. They're always the first ones that are done, because the idea of the sin offering is for one to admit, yes, I'm a sinner by nature and have also committed specific sins.
But it made it sound like it's for Aaron's.
It is.
Well, I have kind of
This is an
questions, maybe
individual.
her, but I'm noticing that it's like for himself and for his house. I'm wondering
Right.
if they have to do the purification to cleanse the tabernacle or from corpse contamination because of the deaths of his 2 sons. Could that be falling into the same?
All right, well, Nancy hits on a very important point, because what we're going to see here is that there is a cleansing. There's 3 times that Aaron enters into the holy place, and there's 3 times he brings something. One is for himself and his household. Then one is for actually the tabernacle area. There's a cleansing that it said this sacrifice and this blood is shed for the cleansing of the tabernacle and the tent. And then there's a cleansing for the rest of the people of Israel. All right, so it's really a 3-fold thing that's going on here. But listen to those distinctions, because that's all a part of it. Okay, but again, the idea of the sacrifice of the sin offering, and again, that's really where all worship should begin, with the recognition that, number 1, I'm a sinner by nature, but I've also committed specific sins. And then the purpose of the burnt offering is to recognize the holiness of God, and it's the sin offering. No, it's the sin offering whereby the sins are taken away. It's the burnt offering whereby God's holiness or forgiveness is imparted to the human being. So they're 2 different things. They go together, but they're both very important. And then we're going to have this new thing that's introduced, this scapegoat. And Jackie just gave the description of it. 2 goats are brought in. They cast lots. One of the goats is going to be sacrificed and killed, and then the other goat, we're going to see it in the ceremony, hands are laid upon the head of the goat, and he's led away into the wilderness. Okay? All right, Tom, you want to read?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
All right, verse 11.
After Aaron had sacrificed a young bull as a sin offering for himself and his family, he shall take a censer. I don't know what a censer is.
It's just a little container.
Full of live coals from the altar of the Lord, and fill his hands with sweet incense beaten into fine powder, and bring it into the veil, and bring it inside the veil.
All right, pause right there. This is very important. And this kind of relates to what Nancy was talking about. So in verse 11 it says, Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself, okay, and his household. So he slaughters the bull to cleanse himself. And then he takes the censer, sometimes referred to as a fire pan, and he takes the coals, And then it says he goes inside the veil. And I interpret that to mean he goes into the Holy of Holies. And then what does he do? He's got the censer or the fire pan here, and he's got the incense right here. All right, read in verse 13, Tommy.
There before the Lord he shall put the incense upon the coal, so that a cloud of incense will cover the mercy place above the ark containing the stone tablet of the Ten Commandments. Thus he will not die.
All right, pause right there. So he goes, he has the censer or the fire pan and the incense. He goes inside the veil. He puts the incense on the fire before the Lord, and it makes a big cloud of smoke inside the Holy of Holy areas. And it says that he covers the mercy seat that is on the ark. What takes place on the mercy seat? That's where God actually appears. Okay, God says, I will meet you right there on the mercy seat between the two cherubim. But it says that he's to do that to create a cloud. Why? So that you will not die.
So he doesn't see.
That's right, exactly. It's the idea of if it's a hiding or it's a covering. Why? And why is it necessary that God doesn't, quote unquote, see the guy who comes behind there?
He can't. He will die.
That's right, because he will die. God's holiness, even with these sacrifices, he is still impure and just meeting God face to face under the circumstances. He would die, and it says that. You got to make this cloud, otherwise you die. Okay, verse 14. Lynn, would you pick up there?
He is to take some of the bull's blood and with his finger sprinkle it on the front of the atonement cover. Then he shall sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the atonement cover.
All right, that may be the second time he goes in, because the first time he goes in, I think he's got the fire pan in one hand, he's got the incense in the other hand, and he makes the smoke. I think he goes out, and then he gets the blood, and he goes in. All right, now read on from there. Was that verse 14?
Yeah, that was 14.
All right, go read 15 then.
He shall then slaughter the goat for the sin offering for the people and take its blood behind the curtain.
Pause right there. I think that's his third trip back, right? Because he obviously couldn't be slaughtering the goat while he's inside. So I think he goes out and he slaughters the goat, and that is to do what? That's for the sins of the people, right? So first he's made a sacrifice to cleanse himself, and now this is for the people. Read on.
And do with it as he did with the bull's blood. He shall sprinkle it on the atonement cover and in front of it. In this way he will make atonement for the most holy place because of the uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins have been. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting, which is among them in their midst of their uncleanness.
All right, pause right there. I think this relates to what Nancy brought up. Yes, the holy place would have been rendered unclean by the sin of Nadab and Abihu, and they were struck dead right there. Their dead bodies would have been impure. They would have been dragged out and they were dealt with. But that did render the holy place impure, so this is a part of the cleansing process there. So we have a cleansing of the priest and his family. We have a cleansing for the children of Israel, and then we have a cleansing, if you will, for the holy place.
Where's the tent of meetings? Is that the entire?
I think, yeah.
The entire.
I think that's the entirety of it. When it's spoken of as the tent of meeting, yeah, that's kind of the whole place here. And then we have, sometimes this is referred to as the holy place, and this is the Holy of Holies, as you know.
But the tent of meetings would have been the entire structure.
I think so.
Okay.
I think that's...
Which, if you will, it seems like they would have represented the entire group of Israelites. In other words, the tent of meetings, this is for everybody.
That's right.
It's to cover the whole lot.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. All right, read on. Look more, Lynn.
No one is to be in the tent of meeting from the time Aaron goes in to make atonement in the most holy place until he comes out, having made atonement for himself, his household, and the whole community of Israel.
Now that's very significant. This relates to what Lindsay was just referring to. When he goes in, so in other words, on this great day of atonement, when the priest goes in, he makes his 3 trips behind the veil, all right? He's got his special clothes on. He's doing the things that we talked about, first making the smoke, then bringing the blood of the bull, and then bringing the blood of the goat in. It is said that nobody else is to be in the tent of meeting. In other words, they're supposed to evacuate, all right? And this one guy is going to be there. What is the New Testament significance of that?
There's only one.
That's right, Christ alone. That's what that means. that if these other priests or others had anything to do with it, one might say, well, somebody other than Jesus was the one who made the atonement. No, the singularity of the presence in the tent of meeting represents Christ and Christ alone and his perfection. All right, let's pick up from there, if you would, please.
Then he shall come out to the altar that is before the Lord and make atonement for it. He shall take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood and put it on the horns of the altar. He shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times to cleanse it and to consecrate it from the uncleanliness of the Israelites. When Aaron had finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meetings, and the altar, he shall bring forward the live goat. He is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins, and put them on the goat's head. He shall send the goat away into the desert in the care of a man appointed for the task. The goat will carry on itself all their sins to a solitary place, and the man shall release it in the desert.
Pause right there. What Lindsay just read, Tommy and really everybody else, this is probably the high point of what occurred on the Great Day of Atonement. But you see, all these things, you ask what the Great Day of Atonement was. The Great Day of Atonement was the date that the priests did all the things that we just discussed. In other words, they cleared out, everybody who was in the tent of meeting cleared out, all right? Aaron put on his linen robes, sacrificed the ram and the bull. But before he did that, of course, he brought the censer inside the Holy of Holies. He made the smoke. Then he brought the blood in, blood of the bull. Then he brought in the blood of the goat. Okay? Everybody saw that. But the most important thing to the people would have been in verse 21. Then Aaron would go outside. He'd take this one goat. One goat was killed and the other survived. And the surviving goat, he would lay his hands on the head of the goat so everybody could see it. And then what would he do? He would confess all of the transgressions of the nation of Israel before God. And then the man appointed for the purpose would take the goat and lead him out into the wilderness. So the people would then see that all of their sins were laid on the head of this goat, and he was taken away. You see, and that was really the high point. That was the culmination of it. Now, the question has been asked, there's 2 goats here. Do those represent Christ? If so, which one? The dead goat or the live goat?
Gotta be live.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Yes. That's right, exactly. One goat was sacrificed as Jesus was, and the other one took away the sins, which is exactly what Jesus did. So the answer is yes, both of them represented Christ, and just not in 2 persons, but in the 2 things that he did. He gave himself as a sacrifice.
It strikes me up when Jesus died on the cross.
Say again?
When Jesus died on the cross, one was killed and one man was let go.
Well, that's right. That's right. But the man that was let go, yeah, that was somewhat symbolic. But again, he wasn't the one who carried away the sins.
No, but I'm just saying.
That's right. That's right. One died and one lived. Barabbas lived. Jesus died. That's an interesting comparison there. All right, 23. Nancy, you want to pick up there?
Then Aaron shall enter the tent of meeting, and shall take off the linen vestments that he put on when he went into the holy place, and shall leave them there. He shall bathe his body in water in the holy place, and put on his vestments. Then he shall come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, making atonement for himself and for the people. The fat of the sin offering he shall turn into smoke on the altar.
Pause right there. That's very, very interesting, very symbolic, because after all of this is done, then Aaron takes off the linen garments. What do the linen garments represent? Again, I don't think the high priest wears all of his majestic vestments. All he's wearing is the linen until the whole process is over with. And then he takes it off, he cleanses himself, and then he puts on all of these, this spectacular vestment. What is the symbolism of that? I'll offer this up to you just as one interpretation, that when was Jesus covered with linen? When he was laid in the grave. That's right. And that was, of course, a very important event. He was taken down from the cross. He was wrapped up in linen. He was placed in the grave. And then when he comes out, all right, the linen is left behind, just like he leaves the linen behind, and he's all of a sudden what? He's in his heavenly vestments at that point in time. He's got a transformed body. Jesus does. And just like when the priest comes out, after the event, after the sins are taken away, then he puts on his glorious garments. Okay?
Could the linen also represent his human skin?
Good, yeah.
And then he
His
would put on his
purity.
heavenly.
That's right. I think that's right. All of his humanness from his life through his death and burial.
That's what they called the death clothes when the women came out and said the grave was empty.
Yeah.
Left his death clothes.
Right.
Shroud.
The shroud that was on him, and then the covering over his head. Remember,
Right.
in one of the Gospels, I think it's John, they said that his grave clothes were folded up, and the covering on his head was in a separate place. The napkin that covered his face was in a separate place. Very symbolic to that too. And then after this, the guy who leads the goat out, he cleans up, and it says, then he shall offer up in smoke the fat of the sin offering on the altar. Again, what's the symbolism of the fat?
Yes.
What's that?
The best part.
The best, that's right, the abundance. The fat represents the abundance. So after this is all over with, then the people will experience the abundance. Okay, then verse 26, read on, 26 to 28.
The one who sets the goat free for Azazel shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward may come into the camp. The bull of the sin offering and the goat of the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, shall be taken outside the camp. Their skin and their flesh and their dung shall be consumed in fire. The one who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward may come into the camp.
Okay, verse 29, Terry, would you pick that up?
This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. On the 10th day of the 7th month, you must deny yourselves and not do any work, whether native born or an alien living among you, because on this day atonement will be made for you to cleanse you. Then before the Lord you will be clean from all your sins. It is a Sabbath of rest, and you must deny yourselves. It is a lasting ordinance.
Pause right there. All right, Tommy, that's the declaration that this is the great day of atonement. This is the day that you shall be clean from all of your sins, and that's why it was such an important day to the Jews. What happened on that day? Well, what happened on that day is just what we spoke of here. That's the day that they cleared the tabernacle, that the priest, the high priest, puts on his linen robe. He goes in 3 times. The thing that's most, the visual significance, well, there's really 2 things I want you to remember about this. Number 1, that the sacrifices that were made on this great day of atonement were in essence a ratification, if you will, of all the sacrifices that had been performed twice per day for every other day of the year. And the other thing that's significant is this is the one day of the year, the unique day of the year, where the 2 goats come up. And the scapegoat is the one upon whose head the high priest's hands are placed, and all the sins of Israel are confessed, and the goat is led away. And after all the sin, the goat is led away and the sins are led away, that's when God declares that now your sin has been atoned for.
So
Okay?
Jesus is the scapegoat.
That's right. Jesus is a scapegoat. He definitely is. He's the one who is, that, we use the term scapegoat these days as what? The one that we lay the blame on. And Jesus is very much the scapegoat. All the blame, all the things that we do wrong in our lives, Jesus is the scapegoat upon which we lay our sins, and he's the one who's taken away all of our sins.
George Bush was a scapegoat for Obama for 8 years.
Yeah, you're right. Good example. All right, Warren, read the rest of that for us, if you would.
Then before the Lord you will be clean from all your sins. It is a Sabbath of rest, and you must deny yourselves. It is a lasting ordinance. The priest who was anointed and ordained to succeed his father and as high priest is to make atonement. He is to put on the sacred linen garment and make atonement for the most holy place, for the tent meeting and the altar, and for the priests and all the people of the community. This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. Atonement is to be made once a year and for all the sins of the Israelites. And it was done as the Lord commanded Moses.
Okay, well, I guess that's a good place for us to stop. But all right, does everybody now see exactly what it is about this great day of atonement? And you see that
I'm just going to put your marks right
as Paul said very clearly, this was just a foreshadowing of things to come. But this was, it was God's purpose in ordaining this great day of atonement to cause everyone to look forward to the day when their sins would be atoned for, when their sins would be forgiven. And of course, we saw that day on the very day that Christ was crucified, resurrected, and then went to heaven. The Jews just totally missed it. But that's what this whole thing was intended to, was to point them to the sacrifice that Christ would make and the atonement that only He could bring. All right. Yes, sir.
That's the question. How many times was that thing moved in 40 years?
That's a good question. We counted that one time, and I believe it was moved 40 times.
Okay. And
On average, about once a year.
The process was when it was established, it had to go through the cleaning and atonement.
That's right, and that's what they did. That's right. That's part of the purpose of the cleaning of the tent, if you will, is because other people would have touched it when they disassembled it and then reassembled it. So just the human contact would have made it unclean. But that's a good question, and we'll see that. That question is answered later on.
It makes sense, once a year.
Yeah, once a year.
So at that pace, because they got to travel, might be after that day, they pick up and move for a year.
Could very well
I
be.
mean, you don't know.
Or maybe the Great Day of Atonement would fall right after they broke in. They set up camp the second time, they'd move, and then they set it up, and then it would need to be cleansed.
But then you have the booths right after, so maybe they're packing it up and getting
Yeah.
ready to, and they're
It's
little huts.
funny how you think of things that shouldn't even relative, but you're the guy to take the scapegoat out. The worst thing is if that scapegoat ever came back into the community.
Yeah.
How they had to take him way, way out.
Yeah.
So,
And I was reading about what they did, and by tradition, they would take him out, and they would take him to a place from which he would never return. It was almost as if they found a place like where there was an extinct volcano, and he kind of pushed him over the head. So there's no chance that he could get back up. But yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. Because I tell you, if that goat ever came wandering back, that'd be a bad day, wouldn't it?